This may be our last good night together.
How you like my new shorts?
We may never pass this way.
This is my friend Chris Christopherson.
Past at P, you got us.
That's it, Chris.
Okay.
Yeah, right. Hey, I'm gonna tell a story if you don't mind.
We may never mass this way again.
That's it, Chris. That's it. Hang on, I show you. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in today. Guess what? I had a request to share the information how Jason Moore came to know the Burkett McInturff. Well, Jason told me this, and I tell you now. I do my best. It's all I can do, in the words of Burkett. Anyway, we were. I'd written a book called Understanding Apples. I was gathering stories for my second book, Gathering Leaves. So Understanding Apples had been released, and it was about the bootleggers of Long Island, my grandfather, his relations with Ransom Bishop, Ezekiel Click, all these notable bootleggers from Long Island. And I gathered the stories for the second book, and I talked to Ethan Buster Brown, a lawman in the area who was always busting these people. And I kept hearing this name, Burkett McInturff, Burkett McInturff. Old history, old lawyer, way back 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, 1980s. Man, he had to be 100 years old. Methuselah, I assumed, an assumption is the bad thing, that he was no longer with us. So, anyway, Jason was in the barbershop, Paul Lewis's red street front barbershop, and a giant of a man sat in the chair, getting his hair cut, and he was having a bad month. His name was J.W. Sally. He was a coach at a Church Hill High School for many years, a very famous coach. Before that, in the 1948, 1947, 1946 Dobyns-Bennett football team, when they were so elite, so number one, they win the state title in 1948. They unscored upon, undefeated. Anyway, J.W. had a brother named D.W. Sally. And D.W. was actually a pastor. He was a preacher his whole life. So these men, in a lot of ways, they coach, they influence people, they move young people in the right direction. But J.W. sat in the chair talking to Paul, and he was so upset because his brother D.W. had passed away. And I felt for him. I felt bad for him. But he had these giant hands. Oh, so big, these hands. And he could tell a story, too. Now, when he finished and he paid Paul and he left, another man stood up to get his hair cut. This man was actually very quiet, somewhat of a listener, until he got into the barber's chair. And then he talked. He's living in Alabama, and he's a lawyer, and his dad is sick. Okay. Well, he started asking me more about my book, because Paul said, hey, Jason, he'll write the book, and he'll write the book about Long Island, about the criminals on Long Island, and everything. Well, we talk a little more, and at the end of the man getting his hair cut, he stand up to pay, and he look at me, and he says, I'm here because my pop is in the hospital fighting for his life. And if he makes it out of this, I think you should go and talk to him. And I said, well, who was your papa? And he said, my pop's Burkett McInturff. Whew. I immediately think, wow, I have opportunity to talk to Burkett McInturff, maybe get a story about my papa I'd never heard, something like this. And so I was so happy when I got home. I looked up Burkett McInturff phone number, his office phone number. I did not realize how serious his hospitalization was at this time. But I called his office phone and I leave a message. Okay. Well, a year passes. My second book comes out. I'm working on the third book. And a whole year has passed. I've not heard from Burkett. I don't read obituaries. I do not do that. But I never heard. And I'm sitting in the back of the Janmar restaurant. Well, excuse me, Jason. Anyway, we're the same person. You know this. I'm sitting in the back of the Janmar restaurant. And Anissa Green is my waitress. And I've just finished eating breakfast. I've been writing some for Rooting Branches, my new book. And all of a sudden, the bell on the restaurant door rings, and this old man steps through. And it's just like this energy fills the room. And Julie was a waitress at that time too. She was a blonde-headed waitress, and she was always bossy to everybody. Just think of maybe Flo from Alice or Mills Diner that way. But she hollers, "Just sit down there, I'll get your food for you now." Now this old man, if you didn't know him, he was a commander. He was always in charge. And he just kind of went, "Rrr," and he sat down in the first seat that was available, which was actually 2 booths in. And he sat down kind of facing where I was. And Anissa came over, and I actually paid at the table. And I said, "Excuse me," I said, "Is that Burkett McInturff?" And she said, "Yes, it is. It's the one and only." And I stood up immediately, and I walked straight over to his booth, and I sat down in front of him. And he looked at me, and he said, "Who are you?" And I looked back, and I said, "Well, who are you?" And he couldn't hear. I found that out, so I wrote it down. "Who are you?" And he began to tell me who he was, and I began to take notes. And he told me some stories that day, and when I finished, I just happened to have one of my first books on me, Understanding Apples. I didn't have the second book yet, but I had the first book. And we were saying goodbye, and I said, "If it's okay," or I wrote it down, "if it's okay, I'd like to meet with you again sometimes." And he said, "What do you got there?" And I said, "It's my book I wrote." And he said, "Well, I want to read that book." And I gave him the book, and he says, "Well, now I'll pay you. I'll pay you." And he reaches into his jacket pocket, and he pulls out a $20 bill. And I say, "No, that's too much. $10? "Ah, hell, take it," he says. And I take the $20, and I don't ever like to take anything for nothing. And I walked out to the car, and I just happened to have a copy of Gathering Leaves with me too. And I walked back in, and I laid that on the table, and I said, "I'll see you in a few weeks," pretty much. I wrote it down. And a few weeks passed, and I did see him. I went up to his office, and he was actually sitting in his chair reading the mail, and Lisa was at the desk doing her stenography work, different things as he would tell her to do things. "Now call so-and-so and make sure that this gets done." And he's still reading his mail, and he'll take money out of his envelope, and he'll stuff it in the VFW and donate $20. Every time he got a letter, he answered it immediately, and he sent everybody $20 in town. I've never seen anything like that before. But he says, "I remember you." He said, "I knew every damn person in your book." He said, "You need to talk to me." And that's what happened. I sat across from him on his couch while he sat in that little chair where he would answer his mail. And his phone would ring sometimes, but it didn't ring that much. You know, at that time he's about 89 years old. Well, I find out that when he was hospitalized, he'd actually had his colon removed, and he was put into a medically induced coma for over 3 months. And when he came out of it, I mean, he was fine. And he had certain lifestyle changes. He had a colostomy bag, different things like that. But this man was so determined and so independent that those things weren't even shortcomings. He just kept going forward. And he still had cases back then too, which I think is fascinating. But I sat across from him, and somebody had given him hearing aids, and they didn't work. But it didn't matter, because I could write down whatever the question was, and he would just tell the story. And I wrote as best I could what he would say, word for word. And this is going to be part 1 to that. And when I come back, we'll have a part 2, and I'll introduce you a little bit more to Burkett McInturff. Now, this is Burkett. This is the Burkett that I met for that first time. He's in a white Stetson hat and a blue pinstripe suit that he bought up in New York. And he would also get hats from Norman Sobel downtown on Center Street, and there were beaver skinned hats too, but we'll find out about that later. But he was much of a man, and I look forward to sharing part 2 with you. Anyway, my name is Jason Moore. JS Moore is my pen name, and thanks for tuning in to Boris. I'll turn it back to him. Yes, thank you so much for tuning in. I love you. We'll see you next time for part 2.